Welcome to today's deep dive.
The most effective leaders right now are actually the ones you barely even notice.
Which brings us to our source material for today's deep dive. When you picture powerful leader, there's probably a very specific, deeply ingrained image that comes to your mind right away.
Oh, absolutely. It's usually someone loud.
Right. Highly visible, like the general at the front of the cavalry, or maybe that charismatic tech CEO pacing a stage with a headset mic, just whipping the whole auditorium into a frenzy.
Yeah, it's a very gravity-centric model. All the information, the strategy, the energy, it all revolves around this one singular person.
Exactly. But what if I told you that in today's landscape, that exact image, the hero standing at the center of the room, is actually the blueprint for organizational failure?
It completely upends how we are conditioned to view authority. I mean, we inherently associate leadership with this commanding physical presence, but the reality of modern, highly complex organizations points in the absolute opposite direction.
Right. We're pulling from a really fascinating March 2026 article published by Podcaster Capital, and it's titled The Invisible Leader.
It's a great piece.
It really is. And it opens with this incredibly striking visual. It describes a silhouette of a person in a sharp suit, and they're just walking away down a sunlit office hallway.
Mm-hmm.
And behind them, completely out of focus, you can see their entire team just humming along, working seamlessly, totally unbothered by the fact that the boss just left the floor.
It's such a powerful image because the core paradox the text presents is this. The strongest leaders today create a system that works entirely without them.
Yeah.
Which, is a profound civilizational shift. This isn't just some trendy management hack or a buzzword about delegation.
No.
What we're looking at is a fundamental transformation in how society understands power, how we measure intelligence, and how we engineer human cooperation at a massive scale.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to really grasp why this invisible leader is so effective, we have to look at what broke the old model.
Right, the outdated heroic narrative.
Yeah, the kings, the generals, the revolutionary founders, it relied entirely on top-down commands. The leader was the singular brain of the operation. And sure, maybe that worked when environments were, relatively static.
Or at least simpler.
Right. But the article points out that sheer complexity has just completely shattered that framework. I mean, today we are dealing with rapid technological change, globally distributed knowledge, highly unpredictable supply chains.
It's just too much. No single human brain, regardless of its processing power or experience, can synthesize the sheer volume of data required to make every critical decision in a modern enterprise.
It's physically impossible.
It is a physiological impossibility. When a leader tries to maintain that heroic posture, they inevitably become this massive bottleneck. If the CEO has to personally sign off on every product feature, every marketing pivot, and every hiring choice, the entire organization is throttled by the cognitive limits of one person.
Right. The speed of the company literally slows down to the speed of the leader's inbox.
Exactly.
Which means leadership has to evolve. The text calls this moving from decision ownership toward decision architecture.
I love that framing.
Me too.
Yeah.
It's a really fascinating distinction. The old model is like playing a game of chess where you have to physically analyze the board and move every single piece yourself to win. But this new systemic model, it's like being the person who designs the chessboard, writes the rules of the physics engine, and then just steps back to let the players play.
That is a perfect analogy. The decision architect doesn't provide the answers. They build the framework where good answers naturally emerge.
Right.
Think about how this works mechanically. Instead of a manager deciding exactly how, say, a software feature should be coded, the architect builds strict criteria.
Like a rubric.
Exactly, a rubric of user retention metrics and latency limits. If a team's new feature meets those systemic requirements, it automatically ships. The leader never even has to look at it.
Wow. So they're completely out of the loop, but in a good way.
Exactly, because humans adapt to the structures around them. Incentives, transparent feedback loops, cultural norms, these dictate behavior much more reliably and consistently than a direct order from a boss ever could.
But that raises a big question. If we abandon the hero model, and leaders are no longer barking orders or delivering these sweeping, dramatic speeches, what actually compels people to do the work?
Right, the motivation factor.
Yeah, because the text is pretty ruthless about this. It just flat out declares that the era of rah-rah motivation is dead.
And it's dead because it is fundamentally unsustainable. I mean, the late 20th century was absolutely obsessed with motivational leadership. We saw this endless parade of inspirational corporate slogans and executives promising massive productivity through sheer enthusiasm.
Oh yeah, the big paradigm-shifting offsites.
Right. But the text refers to this as theatrical energy. It's basically an emotional sugar rush with absolutely zero operational support beneath it.
You leave a town hall meeting feeling like you're ready to conquer the world, but then you go back to your desk and like your software is crashing.
Yep.
Your goals completely contradict your manager's goals, and you have to get 3 different signatures just to approve a $50 expense.
And boom, that motivation evaporates instantly.
Gone.
Theatrical energy just cannot survive a broken environment. So instead of relying on charisma, the article outlines 4 structural pillars of a self-sustaining environment.
Right. Let's go through those.
Okay, so they are clear autonomy, transparent information, psychological safety, and meaningful accountability.
Okay, break those down for me.
Well, clear autonomy doesn't mean anarchy, right? It means bounded freedom. You know exactly what your lane is, and within that lane, you are the absolute authority.
Nobody micromanaging you.
Exactly. Then there's transparent information, which means everyone has access to the same dashboards and the same reality. Leaders aren't hoarding data just to maintain leverage over people.
Which happens all the time.
All the time. And finally, meaningful accountability. This shifts from a punitive, top-down reprimand to a peer-driven system where your performance is visibly linked to the team's success.
Okay, but wait, I have to push back on this a little bit.
Sure.
If you replace human inspiration with this perfectly calibrated machine of transparent data, bounded autonomy, and feedback loops, doesn't that run the risk of feeling incredibly cold?
Doesn't it?
I mean, don't people inherently need to feel inspired by a human being to push through difficult work?
What's fascinating here is that psychologists and software designers have understood for a long time that environment is actually the ultimate motivator.
Really?
Yeah. To address that idea of a system feeling cold, think about what genuinely drains a worker's spirit on a daily basis. Exactly. It isn't a lack of soaring rhetoric. It's constant grinding friction. It's micromanagement. It's knowing the exact solution to a problem but not having the authority to execute it.
Oh, that is the worst feeling.
It is. So when an invisible leader designs a system that strips away those daily frustrations, it inherently trusts the employee's intelligence. Giving someone the tools to do their best work without standing over their shoulder is actually a profoundly empowering, duckly humanizing experience.
That makes a lot of sense.
It respects their agency far more than an empty slogan on a poster ever could.
Okay, sure, I can see that when things are running smoothly. But what about during an acute crisis? Like, let's say a product launch fails spectacularly, or the market suddenly crashes and people are legitimately panicking about their jobs. Doesn't the team need a human leader to step to the front, look them in the eye, and say, I have a plan, we're going to be okay?
See, that is exactly when the systemic model proves its worth over the heroic model.
How so?
Well, in a crisis, a charismatic leader standing up and saying, we're going to be okay, when the internal data clearly shows the company is bleeding cash, that actually destroys trust.
Because people know it's not true.
Right. People aren't stupid. They can sense when rhetoric doesn't match reality. In a systemic, transparent model, the comfort actually comes from the data itself and the established protocols.
Interesting.
If the team already has access to the transparent dashboards, they can collectively see the scope of the problem. And because they have clear autonomy, the teams closest to the failure can immediately begin course correcting.
So they aren't just sitting around waiting for the panicked CEO to issue a directive.
Exactly. The system's resilience is what provides the psychological comfort, not a false savior.
But transitioning from that hero dependency to a distributed system is rarely a smooth process. And the source material dives into the dark side of what happens when leaders panic during this transition.
Yeah, this part is crucial.
When executives realize they need to distribute their power, they often recoil. And they form what the article terms Bonnie and Clyde alliances.
It's such a vital dynamic to recognize, especially because culture has trained us to view Bonnie and Clyde as this romantic, glamorous, us against the world partnership.
Right.
But the article completely flips that imagery. It uses the metaphor to describe a toxic, modernized criminal enterprise operating right within the boundaries of corporate or political structure.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because these are closed power alliances. It might be an executive duo or maybe a tight-knit insider network of vice presidents. And they build their entire operational dynamic on secrecy and mutual protection. It's like a pressure cooker with absolutely no release valve.
And the mechanism that makes these alliances so destructive is that they prioritize loyalty above all else.
Even competence.
Specifically above competence. Internally, for the 2 or 3 people inside that bubble, it feels incredibly efficient. I mean, they don't have to consult anyone, they don't have to debate, they just make a call behind a closed door and execute.
So it produces a high-speed illusion of unity.
Exactly.
But externally, it rots the organization from the inside out. The text points out that these environments become incredibly fragile because dissent becomes inherently unsafe.
Right.
Like if a mid-level manager questions a flawed strategy that was handed down by the Bonnie and Clyde duo, the duo doesn't view it as a business critique. They view it as a threat to their alliance.
Which means accountability completely disappears. The partners in the alliance will always shield one another from the consequences of a bad decision just to protect the power structure itself.
Blind spots just compound.
Because no one is allowed to point them out. And this ties directly into another systemic dysfunction the text identifies, which is snobbishness.
Yes. Let's talk about that.
This is the arrogant, deeply held illusion that high-level intelligence only exists at the top of the hierarchy.
Right, the assumption that the C-suite has to meticulously guide the supposedly weaker followers at the bottom.
Exactly.
But the reality of today's workplace is that knowledge is fiercely distributed. I mean, if you are an executive who thinks you are inherently smarter than your 26-year-old lead developer simply because you sit in a corner office, you are steering the ship straight into an iceberg.
You really are.
The junior employee actually touching the software, interacting with the angry clients, or managing the supply chain logistics, they hold the vital, real-time technical expertise that the executive completely lacks.
And when leaders operate with that intellectual snobbishness, they don't build collaborative environments, they build surveillance mechanisms.
Right, tracking software,
rigid reporting structures, all just to maintain control. But systemic leadership explicitly rejects this. It operates on the core assumption that intelligence exists everywhere in the organization.
everywhere.
The leader's only job is to create the specific conditions required for that hidden intelligence to surface.
Which brings us to the most crucial piece of infrastructure in this entire model, psychological safety.
Yes.
The text leans heavily on foundational research out of Harvard Business School to define this. And it's not just about everyone being universally polite or avoiding conflict.
Not at all.
Psychological safety is the absolute ability to ask questions without humiliation, the freedom to admit mistakes instantly, and the safety to vigorously challenge assumptions regardless of your rank.
The shift in perception here is staggering, because under the traditional command and control leadership model, vulnerability was heavily penalized.
Oh, absolutely.
Admitting you didn't understand a directive or confessing that a project was failing was viewed as a huge liability. It could stall your career. But modern leadership views that exact same vulnerability as critical, load-bearing infrastructure.
You know, it's like, well, psychological safety acts exactly like a software diagnostic tool running in the background of a computer.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Its entire purpose is to catch the bugs, the corrupted files, and the hidden errors in the code before the whole operating system crashes.
Right.
If your engineering team is too terrified of the Bonnie and Clyde executives to tell them a product is critically flawed, the product is still going to fail. The only difference is you're going to find out about it when millions of angry customers are demanding refunds rather than fixing it in development.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that diagnostic mechanism is exactly what makes collective intelligence possible. The article highlights environments where this is quite literally a matter of life and death.
Like where?
Air traffic control, global climate research networks, surgical medical teams. These are highly complex, rapidly shifting, high-stakes ecosystems that absolutely cannot function on top-down command.
Right. Picture a high-pressure operating room. You have a highly decorated veteran senior surgeon who is exhausted and about to make a critical error. Maybe they're about to cut the wrong duct. A junior nurse, fresh out of training, spots the error. In an environment driven by hierarchy and snobbishness, the nurse hesitates. They weigh the risk of humiliating the surgeon against the risk to the patient, and in that split second of hesitation, the patient is injured.
Wow.
But in a psychologically safe system, the nurse speaks up instantly, reflexively, without a single thought about ego or retaliation. The system catches the error.
And the leader in that scenario, the senior surgeon, isn't acting as a flawless hero. They are an ecosystem manager. They have explicitly designed a room where the frictionless flow of transparent information overrides rank.
That's incredible.
It is. And this mirrors the broader civilizational shift we mentioned earlier. We're transitioning from a world defined by scarcity and rigid hierarchies to a world defined by extreme complexity and fluid networks.
You see this everywhere, right?
Everywhere, from the architecture of open source software platforms to decentralized crisis response networks. Large-scale, sophisticated human cooperation is emerging entirely without centralized, heroic command.
So what does this all mean? We've embedded the psychological safety, we've distributed the intelligence, we've set up the transparent dashboards, and we've completely stepped back from the micromanagement.
Right.
How does an invisible leader actually measure their own success?
Well, the source material offers what it calls the ultimate test. And it is elegantly, almost brutally simple. It asks just one question. What happens when the leader leaves the room?
The walkaway test. It's the ultimate metric for whether you built the system or just a cult of personality.
Precisely. If a director takes a 2-week vacation and productivity grinds to an absolute halt, or a crisis hits and the team freezes because they don't know what to do without orders, that leadership has categorically failed.
Because it all depended on them.
Right. The entire operation was dependent on a singular personality, not a resilient structure. Conversely, if the leader leaves the room and collaboration continues smoothly, complex decisions are still being executed, and the work thrives in their absence. Leadership has succeeded. Absence is the only thing that reveals the underlying truth of the system.
It fundamentally changes the goal of leadership. And the text notes that this carries a massive operational shift in how we handle ethics, too.
Yes, the ethical dimension is huge.
Under the charismatic model, moral responsibility was concentrated entirely in one individual. If the CEO was highly ethical, the company acted ethically. But if the CEO was corrupt, like we saw with Enron, the entire entity became corrupt because the power flowed downward from that single point of failure.
Distributing power structurally prevents those single points of moral failure. When you have transparent information and peer-driven accountability embedded directly into the daily workflows, ethics ceases to be just a symbolic plaque on the lobby wall.
It actually becomes real.
It becomes an operational mechanism. You literally cannot hide a corrupt accounting practice if the financial dashboards are universally transparent, and any junior auditor has the psychological safety to flag an anomaly without fear of being fired. The system polices itself.
So let's zoom out here. The text points out that the macro crises we are staring down today, runaway climate change, the ethical deployment of artificial intelligence, massive global supply chain disruptions, these are intensely complex network problems.
They are, and they cannot be solved by a lone, brilliant hero riding in on a white horse.
Right.
They require massive, coordinated systems of collective intelligence operating seamlessly across borders and academic disciplines. The leaders who will actually move the needle on these issues won't be visionaries handing down blueprints. They will be connectors and translators. Their only job will be designing the conditions for unprecedented cooperation.
Which brings us right back to that visual from the beginning of the Podcaster Capital article. The silhouette of the leader in the suit walking away down the sunlit hallway, leaving their team behind them.
Such a great image to end on.
When you first see it, it looks like someone retreating. But now, understanding the architecture behind it, you realize that person isn't quitting. They haven't abandoned their post.
Yeah.
That walk down the hallway is actually the ultimate victory lap. They have meticulously engineered a machine so resilient, so intelligent, and so perfectly calibrated that it no longer requires their presence to thrive.
This raises an important question for all of us, really. It is the ultimate paradox of power. The strongest, most effective leaders dedicate their entire tenure to making themselves entirely unnecessary. And by achieving that exact state of obsolescence, they prove themselves to be indispensable architects.
We've covered massive ground today, moving away from the exhausted, bottlenecked hero who has to hold all the answers, to the invisible architect who builds self-sustaining ecosystems. We've explored the mechanics of transparency, the critical infrastructure of psychological safety, and the toxic fragility of closed alliances.
It's been a fascinating deep dive.
It really has. But I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. The source material today focused heavily on massive corporate structures, global supply chains, and professional organizations.
Right.
But what if we applied this exact concept of invisible leadership to the microenvironments in our personal lives?
Oh, that's an interesting angle.
Think about it. If you were to look objectively at your own household, your core friend group, or maybe a local community project you volunteer for,
Yeah.
what transparent systems, what layers of safety and autonomy could you begin building today?
Yeah.
If you had to step completely away tomorrow, what would you need to design right now so that the people you care about could continue to thrive entirely without you? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the invisible structures around you, keep looking for the architecture beneath the surface, and we will catch you next time.